Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. You will hear from industry leaders covering innovative, cutting-edge business, learning, and HR topics that weave current market research and technology into each episode. Our Excellence at Work podcast is hosted by Brandon Hall Group's Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Thank you for tuning in to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast, and don't forget to subscribe. Today we have a great episode with David Proegler, the Managing Principal from Latitude. Hi, David. How are you?
Doing well, Rachel. Thanks for having me this morning.
It's great to be chatting with you today. And today we're going to be talking about how companies adapted during COVID to address remote learning challenges. And before we dive into our discussion, I just want to share with our audience a little bit about your background and your organization. As I mentioned, you're the managing principal with Latitude. You lead sales, client, and partner relation development. David nearly has 25 years as a results-driven leader in business management consulting with extensive experience in the automotive industry, building and delivering solutions. And your organization, Learning Latitude, is Latitude CG is the home of Latitude Learning, the partner learning platform, which is designed for the unique needs of partner training programs to train the people that sell, service, and use products. Latitude has been providing solutions for companies globally for more than 30 years, with across over 3 million clients. I think that's correct, right?
That is correct. Yeah, probably 3 million users, probably more accurately than clients. The number's slightly smaller than that, but yes, close enough.
And you've received also Brandon Hall Group Excellence Awards in 2021. Congratulations.
Thank you. Excited to be able to do that. I mean, again, I think that's a validation of our effort and folks in the industry and our partners with Brandon Hall. I think it really is important to stay engaged with your organization, with Brandon Hall, to bring the views of training the extended enterprise to bear in these discussions and all the things going forward. And it helps us when we're talking to our clients as well. So it's a great recognition on your part. Thank you.
And you should be very proud because you are evaluated from our team of analysts as well as a team of industry professionals, and to continue the vigor and be be able to connect and to help your clients during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. And we've also conducted research with you over the past couple of years here and several webinars. And so today our discussion is kind of an extension of kind of a continuation of our partnership. And we want to hear from you about, your point of view and your perspective and how you're working with your clients to help them during these interesting times, as I'd like to say. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your background before we kind of dive into our topic today?
I think you did a great job covering my background. I've had the opportunity to focus on learning solutions now, really solely for the last 5 or 6 years. Again, working with large organizations as they struggle with the issues relating to training what we call partner networks for the extended enterprise. And it really is an exciting time to be working in this space. Obviously, coming through COVID, new challenges there, but new opportunities as well. So really excited about what the future holds for everyone in this space, and really excited for what we can bring to the table on that conversation.
Absolutely, and so am I, because I think there's a lot of opportunities, and we see it, with our team, with our company, and with the clients that we work with. That yes, we can't hide that this has not been a hard time for everybody in different ways. However, companies and people that have been able to come out of it or continue to forge ahead and that are optimistic. I've looked at 4 opportunities, whether it's to kind of reflect on what they're doing, reflect on their company, and and create new opportunities. So I feel very positive about where we're headed. And from what you saw, how did COVID impact certification programs and learning programs?
We have to step back just a little bit and set up what really is driving these organizations to really understand the full impact of what was going on. We did 2 studies last year. One was the general impacts of COVID, and then we found enough of a reason to look at this to say, look, how is this really impacting certification, skill-based, hands-on based kinds of solutions? But to better understand that impact, we have to really look at how these programs service these organizations. It is very important to note that companies that have these partner networks, the people that make, sell, service, and use your products, right, really rely on the skill sets of the individuals that are providing service of that network to be current and fresh, to drive, the quality metrics, to drive, the net promoter scores, to reduce warranty costs, and all the things that really make sure that those industries and those organizations are running as efficiently as possible. What we saw during COVID in the broad sense, we all know that things stopped, right? And immediately, one of the things that stopped was hands-on learning. A lot of these networks, when you're learning about turning a wrench on something, it requires some level of hands-on capability. So immediately when that stopped, it created this big interruption in the process. Some organizations simply went back soon after the initial wave, but in a lot of ways, all the things that went around that, the hands-on learning, the validation by a mentor, or the verification of skills by a mentor, all that stuff that really is hands-on and important and in person, all that got stopped, and that created a sort of a long as it went on and on and on. It created a lot of backlog, and there was a lot of things that were being done in the networks to sort of accommodate it. But we reached a point where it couldn't happen. And ultimately, the impacts of that begin to degrade customer metrics and begin to degrade performance scores and quality metrics, those kinds of things. And really, that's where we're at now in trying to recover from that from a process perspective. That's how it impacted things in general. It really did have a demonstrable impact to the bottom line and the performance capability of these networks. And we think it's vital to their success and the richness of their capability.
Of course. And did you see that there were some areas that you saw there were more challenges in versus other areas?
Yeah, specifically when you start talking about the organizations that required 2 components. One, hands-on kinds of learning, right? And it spans industries. Extreme. We had the opportunity to speak to a major airline. And the idea of being a pilot is you must train a certain level. And when they couldn't train, you couldn't meet those levels. And they really facilities were shut down that had never been shut down in their 20-year history, right? And how do you overcome that? That's an extreme case. And they decided very quickly to get back to flying and do that kind of stuff because it was needed. Step back a little bit from that and start talking about industries like the automotive industry and when you have dealerships that have to turn wrenches on cars, and to do that effectively and make sure you're doing warranty repairs with skilled technicians and that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, the inability to actually do that in person began to degrade, or it began to mean that people were falling out of compliance. You weren't able to take the things that the class to stay current. You weren't able to get updates on new technologies. You weren't able to do a bunch of things. And there was a period where they were able to facilitate that and let that go and grandfather people in. But it also created a backlog, and now you got to catch everyone back up. And oh, by the way, the world doesn't stop. There's new stuff out there and everything else. So we're seeing a lot of impacts in organizations that really were reliant on that kind of hands-on training approach and the need to have a mentor or validation of the skills that were being trained during that. So those 2 things were profoundly impacted along the way. And we saw, the use of virtual technologies like GoToMeeting, like Zoom, like things we're on now, as a way to facilitate that a bit. They wrung out even more of the blended and shortened the hands-on, but it still had a profound impact on the throughput and the quality of these organizations.
Well, you see, you brought up cars, for example, and obviously there's a shortage in production, whether, just the manufactured goods that we can't get, or just the inability to be able to produce them because of either shortage of talent or a decrease in the workplace. or the lack of wanting to go to the workplace because of being shut down, and all these different variables. So that it does have a trickle down impact. Effects on everyone, on the company, on us as buyers, and so my brother was telling me one of his kids, they've had all three boys have already graduated college, and the last one, he finally got rid of the car. I think that car has been through all of them, and it was I'm not even sure, it was some kind of truck Jeep, but it lasted, I want to say, at least a decade. And he told me he sold it for $5,000. I was like, what? But there's such a demand for cars right now, even used cars, because you just can't get them. So, how do we, going back to learning, so, for specific jobs that, require more still in-person, training, testing, so forth, are there still things that we could do to help, to help blend it? Does VR work in these environments, and does other simulations or, the metaverse?
Right. I think it's a great question. And one of the things we were excited to see as we did this, we began to see at the tail end of 2021, get my years right here, that those technologies that were seemingly unreachable or unattainable at the beginning of this had really started to become at least attainable and being considered from a mainstream user perspective. We had the opportunity to speak to several organizations that had started to use virtual technologies to facilitate the training. And in the classic application, you're using something like the Microsoft HoloLens, not to advertise or anything, but to overlay as I look at a machine, doesn't matter if it's a car or a device in a factory or whatever, that overlays what someone has to do. And that is a great training aid for someone to learn and refresh and know that they're going through the right steps and what they have to pull from. And I think those are going to continue to emerge and evolve and become more and more attainable for people to use. But we also heard an interesting use of that technology as a solution to the issue of having a mentor look over your shoulder or a trainee look over the trainer's shoulder. And what we heard and what we've seen actually is having organizations have the trainer have one of these devices on their head, and rather than projecting something, it is actually being fed through the virtual meeting platform. So as a student, whether I'm next door or 500 miles away, I'm seeing exactly what they're doing, and I'm getting this very firsthand experience, which is actually in some cases better than what they got when they were going to the training facility. So great job. It's a way to bridge that. But then flip the paradigm around and actually put the device on the student's head so they can sit and watch the class. They can do everything, learn what they're supposed to learn. Then they put the device on, and then the instructor or mentor can look over their shoulder while they're going through it. And it brings them much closer together while still being hundreds of miles apart potentially. And we see that as an interesting bridge. It's not the absolute virtual environment or augmented reality environment. It's simply using a technology that's integrated with meeting platforms like this to facilitate a better experience. And one other thing that I'll say is we also heard through this that as they came over this bridge and started using virtual technologies, that it actually helped them in their in-person training to make sure everyone in the room either could be spread out and B, still have a really good view of what was going on from a training perspective. So it really did have a lot of really good impact. And I think it's here to stay. It's going to continue to evolve for them overall.
So you're bringing the virtual aspect of it actually at times into the live classroom too. So you kind of, it's the blended, spectrum of delivering learning.
One more point on the blended side of things. I mean, the aspect for these networks is if you're not on the floor, you're not earning money for the organization. So there's always been this push to wring out as much time as possible from being off the floor. Any training takes them off the floor, and so the manufacturing industries, automotive industries, these repair network-based organizations have really been focused on making a true blended model, and they were the first to adopt it when e-learning came on, and they evolve it and perfect it. And what we even saw through COVID was wringing out even more. What they used to do in 5 days, now doing 3 days, right? So and it was facilitated by this new technology set that was there. And they realized, hey, we can do some of that very basic stuff that we relied on the classroom to do virtually, because we had this experience. And it really has evolved and will continue to be there. And what one other aspect of that is, we know for a fact that even in the facilities, that organizations are utilizing multiple camera sets, multiple camera angles, whether you have a VR headset on or not. It's now making a better experience from a training perspective that only would have happened at the speed it happened because of COVID.
Right. So there's the opportunity that we took from that, and I think that our research continues to show that people just don't want to sit in a learning class or a training class for days or weeks. They just really want it when they need it. And for it to be able to stay or to stick with them, it has to be embedded in what they're doing. So they need to be able to have access to whatever kind of development that day, that hour, that moment. So the more that we have these tools and these new ways of bringing it to them, then you don't have to start and stop. It could be a morning memo. Here's a quick update on if you're selling cars, or your new, if you're fixing a plane. So, here, don't forget. So all these things that we can help people kind of, embrace the learning and really kind of get it and for it to stick. I think that, as you mentioned, we have all these tools that they're here to stay, and they're going to continue to get better.
They really are. And I think the other fascinating thing about two components or responses back to what you just said, I think the idea of having these learning bites, right? Having this be something that is the ability to take these recorded sessions, right, and turn them into learning bites. So you do conduct an online training, you record it. Now you have an immediate vehicle to produce a learning bite for the day. Don't forget to do this. Here's a reminder here. Whereas before, it had to be an intentional act outside of this to create it. Now you have the recordings coming out of these virtual sessions are the raw materials that go into those learning bites. And we're hearing organizations do exactly what you just said. Here's the morning wake up thing. Here's the weekly reminder. It's simply just a bite taken from a virtual session that was done that was found to be useful, right? And very, very helpful. The other thing is, as you said, the idea of smaller bites of learning and be able to apply it immediately, maybe not so much in the repair industry, but where you're working in these networks where before someone would go to a week's worth of training and they'd have to absorb it. They'd have to sort of make sure they understood it. They go through all the testing and then they go back and apply it. Well, now we're seeing organizations do that same week's worth of training potentially over 3 or 4 weeks, right? At much smaller bites. But the cool thing about that is, as they learn a piece of information or learn a skill, they can actually go to their day job during the rest of the day and apply that skill and come back and go, that worked or that didn't work. Let me ask you why. And we're hearing that there's a richer experience between the instructor and the learner in that process. And over time, even though the training is taking a longer period, it's more impactful and more ingrained in what they're doing, because they can apply it, practice it, and come back and question it if they need to and learn from it. Not so much in the technology space, but oftentimes in the business operations space, when you're learning business practice for selling and other things that they can apply it immediately. Really very powerful.
Well, and it's not ending. It truly is it's truly continuous. It's a learning journey. And
Correct.
that's something we talk a lot about, that it should never just be a begin to an end. It should lead from one thing to another. Even as you change your careers, what you've learned does not go away necessarily, especially if it's impactful and helpful. So, what else is there? What else from what you're seeing or what other strategies? There's a lot. There's a lot for learning professionals, for leaders, for employees to consider. So how do you define that strategy, and how do you, because this is all great, but how do we execute on all of this?
Well, I think it's vitally important. One of the things we haven't touched on a bit, and it's a topic I think we're doing where I know we're doing some research on now, relating to sort of this skill gap, right? This idea of saying we have this diminishing workforce, we have people coming in, there's always this gap that exists. I think one of the things that COVID highlighted was making sure you understood where your skills and what skills were needed to perform at the level necessary for an organization. It doesn't matter, again, what your role is and what kind of organization you have, but knowing, we think the first order of business is really understanding the skills that are necessary and the mix of those skills necessary to be able to perform the mission of the organization, right? A dealership of X size needs these number of technicians, these levels, and of this mix. Or if I'm a manufacturing organization, I need this number of people that have these skills. Or if I'm a sales organization, I need these things. And what we see right now is really an alignment. If organizations are going to do this the right way, they need to have a clear understanding of the skills that are necessary to perform their mission. That's the first order of business. That's the basic tool they need. From there, it's defining what mix of talent you need based on the mission you have available to you. And can you identify quickly the individuals that are able to perform at that, right? And be able to deliver on that mission. And if you can't, you need a tool that does that, or need a process that does that, right? And ultimately, that's the gap that you have. And what you then need to, once you've done that, then you begin for organizations to really be successful at that, is you bring the metrics, the performance metrics of the organization back into those skills to make sure that the training that you're doing, right, is having an impact on those things. I mentioned earlier at the very beginning of this, when COVID stopped, right, the impact of this was really related to organizations that had to stop the training. And early on, it didn't matter. But as it waned and went on, we know that quality metrics are impacted. We know that performance metrics of those networks are impacted. We know that customer satisfaction scores dropped, all the things. I can share you some scary stories about things that happened when people were when organizations were purposefully not following all the rules.
No.
But I don't want to do that. But anyway, ultimately, the idea is that it's because those skills were atrophying. So what we want to do is make sure you tie the performance metrics back to the skills, back to the mix, be able to have a very ready picture of those things. And that's really, organizations are doing that successfully, are really using training to move the needle of their organizations, drive performance. They're a partner to the whole thing. And that's really what I think organizations have to do holistically to be successful and to avoid any of the stuff that's going on, or be prepared for, more accurately, the future that's going to continue to evolve as we move forward, COVID or otherwise. I think it's very important that people have that holistic picture and treat things in that manner for their success, especially these network-based organizations.
Yeah, they really need to. They have to have a good grip on the whole, the big footprint, and then the granular, what they need to do to, all the different processes and functions, but they have to really have a good handle of what the big picture is.
Agreed. I'll add just one more small comment to that. I think one of the things that organizations do often focus on, did this person get the course? Well, learning something isn't the skill to apply it, right? It's the skills that go along with that. If I learn how to change a tire and I learn how to do something, until I've done it 10 times, it's not a skill I have. It's a bit of knowledge I've attained. And oftentimes these networks require you to have a bunch of knowledge that translates to skills. So not only am I the machine operator on this station or the primary person in a certain role, it's the ability to weave all those things together that really makes up that skill set for that person to be successful. It makes the whole engine run going further. And I think that's really where too often organizations have relied simply on the fact that I take course A or course B. And that's really not, that's okay. That's a building block. It really has to be that use of skills, the mix of skills, and the mission you're performing, tied back to the metrics that are you're using to measure that performance. It really
and
is.
and they have to have room to apply it and to practice.
Right.
Because what we're also seeing is that, everyone is playing or is wearing different hats, and and some days they're playing manager, and some days they may be selling or fixing or programming or designing or presenting. And so to go from all these different skills or different processes, and then to be able to do them all well, and you're not really practicing any of them enough at any given time. So we need to kind of think, how does that play a role into, their ability or capabilities? And, how can we maybe perhaps redesign the workforce, or how do we move people around where people are better fit in certain positions? And,
Right.
to do that, you have to have the data, and you have to have a strategy, and you have to understand what does the business need, and what kind of skills and people do you have, and how does that work? And we saw some examples, during COVID, where they really had to reshift instead of firing employees, but there were a lot of roles that they didn't need during the shutdown, and so to be able to, but they had the need for other roles that they didn't have. So for them to be able to be efficient and effective, they were, this one organization in particular, a large telecommunication company, really started to kind of, and a few others too, really started to kind of retrain quickly and ramp up what they needed to support the company at that given time. And then, from there, continue on. But, be able to have that agility is so important.
We hear one more thing in that, and to add on to that, it's also the nature of younger workers as they come into these networks, right? It doesn't matter where they're coming into, understanding what they have to do to move forward, right? And part of that is, I'm starting here, I need to get here, and that can be a prescribed path, and know that what they're doing is going to have an impact on the organization. That's vitally important, but also allowing them to explore and do some other things with regards to, okay, I'm doing this, but this might be something else I want to do. Having that visibility and understanding exactly what skills I need to move throughout this network, because the other side of that is we also heard that people that didn't do that really had a tough time retaining employees, because they didn't have an idea of their worth or their worth to the organization, and they went and found someplace that did, and some of that's because of COVID and flexibility of movement. But the reality is, the common theme in that whole thing is, what do I need to do to provide value to the organization, again, at the skill level, and have an impact, and know I'm having an impact along the way.
Yes. Yes. I couldn't agree more. And before we wrap up today, my last question to you is, what do you anticipate for the remaining of 2022 and the future looks like?
Well, I think we're going to see a continue. There's a big backlog of effort to get people caught up, and I'm anticipating organizations are really going to focus on that from an activity perspective. I think that as we come out of this, the other strategy we're hearing quite regularly is, how do we avoid this in the future, right? How do we guard ourselves against these future impacts? So there's going to be, I think, I see organizations that we deal with really putting that in the forefront of the conversation. I think you're seeing organizations that have come out of this that have had hits to their performance metrics, that are really trying to double down on their efforts and reinvesting in those things to rebuild the structures that were there before, but on new technologies, new delivery mechanisms. I think that is I think those are the two things we're seeing from the industries that we deal with. But one other thing, as we've talked about around quite a bit, is really do see that this whole concept of delivering in a virtual way isn't simply just taking old content and restructuring. I think there's a whole new instructional design paradigm that has already evolved and going to continue to gain traction in the learning industry in general, that really has to be perfected to take advantage of these things in the future. Because it's only going to get more demand for it, no matter how much people want to put the genie back in the bottle and go back to instructor-led training. The reality is it saves money. People don't have to travel. They're not off the floor. So you have to get more and more efficient. So I think in the general industry perspective, that capability is really going to have to evolve and improve, and really presents a lot of opportunities for people in the instructional design space. So that's where I think things are going in the next few months for the balance of the year.
Well, lots of great stuff. It'll be exciting to see where our year takes us. So all upward going forward from here, I hope.
Let's hope.
Yes. And on that note, thank you, David. Thanks for chatting with me today. And thank you for listening in.
Rachel, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you as well. And thank you everyone for listening in.